What's happening, fam? Chapter 1055 of One Piece is out. It is called The New Era, and we have a lot to talk about. Now, we have no cover page to talk about for this week, so we'll get right into it. We have a good amount of action in this chapter, as well as some lore with a tiny amount of hype sprinkled throughout the story. But for the most part, we spend a lot of the first part of the chapter with the fight between Green Bull, Yamato, Momonosuke, and the Scabbards. And I guess one of the first things that's worth talking about in regards to the characters involved here is going to be Green Bull. This guy's devil fruit powers are obviously really good, but at the same time, we do get a little bit more information on what he's capable of throughout this chapter. As we can see here, he has the ability to use armament haki, at least I'm assuming that's what armament haki is, and he also uses an interesting technique. I mean, there's a moment where Raizo uses a fire release technique against the Woods fruit, and to borrow a Pokemon term, that should be a type advantage, but obviously as a Navy Admiral, Green Bull has already prepared for such a thing and then uses a technique that is named Fire Break Forest. I'm sorry, what? This is so far-fetched, but I have an imagination, so I guess I can kind of come up with two possible ways that this is within the realm of possibility. The first of which is that he uses the moisture from plants to extinguish the fire. As you can see from this image here, that he is either engulfed in flame, smoke, or even steam. It's not really clear, and it definitely isn't explained at all, but it's also possible that he may have changed the vegetation into plants that are fireproof, as there are a handful of plants that have been proven to be fireproof. So that is a very convenient move to have, but I guess it's not impossible. In terms of his weaknesses, my best guess is possibly that you might have to attack his root system in order to keep him from regenerating or popping up elsewhere. As we can see here, after he took an attack from Momonosuke that we'll talk about here a little bit later, when he reforms, it starts with a mere plant sprout and then it sprouts his entire body for his recovery. So ultimately, with Green Bull and his depiction in this chapter, we do get a lot of information and a lot of things to speculate about in regards to his devil fruit, as it has a lot of odd properties, but it does ultimately come across as a Logia, the way he can reform his body and the way that we see here. And what's more, aside from his powers and his devil fruit abilities, we do see a little bit of his personality get to shine through in this chapter, not just with his interactions with the fight, but as the fight is broken up by Shanks when he's using his Conqueror's Haki, we can see a little bit of animated body movements and personality quirks as he's kind of quote-unquote freaking out about Shanks' presence, but ultimately he does back down. He doesn't want any smoke with Shanks, as he knows that Shanks would likely win whatever conflict that the two of them might have. And this lends a little bit of credence all the way back to Marineford, when we saw Kizaru almost jokingly put his hands up when Ben Beckman encountered him. So he does appear to be confident of his powers, talking about Green Bull, but he isn't confident enough to take on the Red Hair Pirates. And ultimately that's enough reason for him to leave the scene. Now, I do have one other thought about this character and his fight in this chapter, and that is whether or not the Scabbards were using haki to cut him down. This would present some issues in terms of him being a Logia. Obviously, it could just be that the whole root system explanation could be why he hasn't actually taken any serious damage. But if he is a Logia and they are using haki, even cutting his branches should injure him in some way, shape, or form. So I guess we'll just have to wait for an explanation on that. Next up to talk about is going to be Momonosuke and his amazing character growth throughout this chapter. It honestly has just been impressive throughout all of Wano, but it's really put on full display here in this chapter, as we see that he is not only growing in terms of his reasoning and his morals, but his ability to lead and make leadership type decisions. Now, I know the concept of a shonen based character being brave in the face of danger is not something new to any of us here, but it's just really refreshing to see an 8-year-old kid take on this kind of responsibility and put himself in danger for the sake of protecting the Straw Hats. Despite the fact that the Straw Hats were watching and willing to help out, he decided that it was best for Wano to learn to defend itself without using outside help. That aside, in terms of his power and the display of power that he puts on in this chapter, is just impressive. My favorite panel by far is this panel here of him using his very first blast breath to pierce a big hole into Admiral Green Bull. It's just an amazingly shaded panel, very detailed where it needs to be. It's just top stuff here. Now, in regards to the future of Momonosuke, I imagine that after the Straw Hats leave Wano, probably with Yamato, we will probably check in with this character before they have any kind of reunion, but I'd love to see the progress of him mastering his devil fruit abilities. And I would imagine that he, at least with his, hybrid form and using the dragon techniques, I would assume that he would be on par with Kaido by the next time that they meet up with the Straw Hats, but it's entirely possible that he might have something different to offer, seeing as how his devil fruit is not exactly the same as Kaido's. I mean, maybe it's possible that Vegapunk actually cloned a devil fruit, but I would imagine there has to be some distinct differences aside from just the pink color. So we just continue to see great things from Momonosuke throughout the end of this arc. Moving on though, the next thing worth talking about is the massive lore dump that we get from the eldest Kozuki clan member, Sukiyaki, as we start off with him taking Robin down a stairwell that leads all the way to the bottom of Wano itself. And this is a route that he kind of hid from Kaido, or at least failed to tell Kaido about. Not that it made too much difference, since Jack was actually able to swim from the outside all the way down to the old Wano and into the room where the poneglyph is held. But I will say though that I'm glad that Law tagged along for this little trip. One, it's just a cool aesthetic to have him there with Robin, since they're both kind of history buffs, but at the same time it adds a different kind of atmosphere to the potential knowledge that we might get before this whole scene is done and over with, as I would imagine that it would continue into the next chapter. We won't just have Robin and them return to the surface before we see anything else. Also, I would hope that Law would inquire about the D clan if Sukiyaki at all has any information to offer him. But as it is stated in this chapter that this is the third road poneglyph that the Straw Hats have acquired, I'm assuming Robin is going to copy it, if not memorize its contents. And I would imagine that aside from the information about the old Wano being sunken, we're probably going to learn something from that road poneglyph aside from just directions, but maybe we'll just have to wait for the next couple chapters to figure out exactly what that is. One issue I do have with the lore about this whole sunken Wano thing is, how is it possible that Sukiyaki doesn't know what happened? I would imagine that somebody would have passed down this information about how Wano came to end up in that place, but it seems that Sukiyaki just doesn't know. And as annoying as that is, it kind of makes sense, as this is the Wano that took place during the Void Century, or during the Void Century Wars, and most likely has a great story behind it as to why this happened and why they decided to flood this entire city. Now, they rebuilt it anew, obviously, but at the same time, I guess in order for Oda to preserve the storyline of what went down during the Void Century, or maybe just for him to tell us everything in one big flashback or something, we got to keep this a secret, which is, I guess, okay with me. I will say that throughout this explanation, I do like the cultural references to Japan, as we see the mountain that is on display in this reference here is actually referring to the mountain of Mount Fuji, which is the highest mountain in Japan. So I myself am a history buff. I can relate to Robin in that way, and I kind of really love scenes like this that kind of give us a little bit of insight into the old world of One Piece. So despite the fact that this scene was for the most part kind of tame and just dialogue heavy, I really appreciated it, probably more so than the other scenes in this chapter. So throughout this chapter, we get the reveal of the road poneglyph and old Wano, which both should raise a good amount of questions, but by far the biggest reveal that we get from this exposition from Sukiyaki is the existence of Pluton down there in old Wano. And man, there's a lot to dissect from that simple reveal. For one, why is it still down there? Why has no one seen it? Does Jack know about the Pluton, or does he even know what he was looking at if he did see it? But at the same time, the most important thing to kind of grasp from this is the fact that the walls have to come down for Pluton to be retrieved, or to be unleashed, as it's said in this chapter. And if that is the case, it does raise the question as to why Odin would want to do that. My personal opinion is that it might have something to do with Lady Toki, since we know that she actually comes from the Void Century 800 years ago, and wanted to get to Wano. She might have known something about Pluton, and if she did, she almost certainly would have told Odin, which could have been his reasoning for opening the borders. And at the same time, since Momonosuke has read the journal, he and Yamato could be privy to Pluton's existence, and it could have been the reasoning as to why Momonosuke decided not to open the borders. And what's more, that even opens up the possibility that Zunisha might have knowledge of Pluton, or could be linked to Pluton, as we know that as soon as Momonosuke told Zunisha that he wasn't going to open the northern borders, Zunisha went on his way. So for this scene that we get from Robin, Law, and Sukiyaki, giving us a little bit of lore, a little bit of exposition, and a little bit of information, and some good reveals, especially in regards to Pluton, I sincerely hope that we get to see a little bit more of it, or a little more dialogue between these characters before Wano comes to its end. So I guess the last thing that we should be talking about during this chapter is going to be Red-Haired Shanks and his role within it. Honestly, we don't get a whole lot from him, just a couple pages, but the couple pages that we do get are amazing. He exudes his Conqueror's Haki to pretty much interrupt the fight between Momonosuke and his retainers, as well as Green Bull. And Green Bull absolutely wants nothing to do with Shanks. And this is kind of an indicator about Green Bull's power, or at least his confidence in his power. He's willing to take on small fries. He's willing to take on people who he isn't familiar with. But when it comes to the Yonko, like Kaido and like Shanks, he did not want to engage them alone. Now, I know that the One Piece community is a bit mixed on power scaling, but I hope this would add a little bit to the credence that the Yonko are actually above the admirals. But when it comes to Shanks, it was definitely interesting to see him interrupt this fight. It does seem like a little bit of a callback to Marineford, but the look on his face here in this panel is just of utter seriousness, and I think that that's very telling about how involved this character is going to be going forward, especially now that he's pretty much saved Momonosuke with his Conqueror's Haki. This could lead to Momonosuke or even Sukiyaki being grateful for the save and eventually showing Shanks the road poneglyph, so that way he himself can pursue the One Piece like he said he's going to in the last chapter. So guys, that's all I got on this chapter. If I had to say one more thing, I do appreciate and love the scene that we get with the 4 Straw Hats waiting to see if they need to interfere and save Momonosuke, giving him the opportunity to stand up for himself. The one thing I would change about it is putting Usopp in the background ready to snipe. That would have given him a little bit more of intensity and badassness in this moment, but ultimately I think it's just a good reason to show off the new strongest 4 Straw Hats, including Jinbei. Now, if I had to give this chapter a rating, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. It's still an amazing chapter, not quite as good as the last one in my personal opinion, but I did like the history dump. I did like the moments with Momonosuke. It would appear from the dialogue in this chapter that at least Momonosuke has his heart set on Yamato setting sail with the Straw Hats, so maybe that does lend credence to her actually officially being a Straw Hat crew member here very shortly. But guys, that's all I got. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on the chapter. Let me know if you agreed or disagreed with anything I said, or if you just want to talk about something One Piece in general. I'm always listening. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content and look forward to more like it. Thanks once again if you made it all the way through the video. My name is John from AFA, and I'll catch you in the next video.